What's the situation on farms in North America for 2023? How did we end up? And what are we going to do in 2024? How do the numbers look? That's what's coming up in this edition of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. We got Chris Barron, friend of show, recurring guest. He runs a company called AgView Solutions, puts out a podcast called the AgView Pitch. Very good information. He's a numbers guy. He's also a farmer. This isn't one of these dudes. It's like, oh yes, I'm a friend of the farmer. I can tell me all your numbers. He does it himself. He's in Iowa. He has a relationship with Shay Folk, who's also been on here, who farms down in in Illinois. And they basically... they help farms improve their numbers. They do some information sharing. They do essentially some forecasting, and he can tell you the rest of that. But what we're going to do is talk about, how did 2023 end up? What did the cash coffers look like? How accurate were Chris's predictions? And then a look ahead to 2024. So I hope I did that right, Mr. Barron, when I introduced you. We know each other, so I don't know, biographically, as I do that right?
Yeah. I farm in Iowa and kind of do the same thing our clients do. So it's kind of a test. Certain times of the year when we're busy on the farm, it's pretty easy to be busy on my own farm operation because people don't want to crunch numbers that time of year when they're in the middle of planting or in the middle of harvest. But the rest of the year, I think that's where the money's made, though, is at the desk and crunching the numbers.
Speaking of, and you and I fully, years ago, someone said, if you were farming, what would you? And I said, well, certainly, I've been around it. I was the guy out there carrying the buckets, and so I know that side of it. And then there's the hide in the piece of machinery, the guy that loves to be the operator. There's the guy that loves to be in the shop. And there's a guy that understands the need to be at the desk. I said, I'd be in the office kind of a farmer. I think that's where we need to be. And that's really what we're talking about, is the be in the office mindset right now. We were predicting in 2023, I had on Shay and Joe Vaklovic. It was November of 13. Right now, we're recording this in December, beginning of December. It was 13 months ago, Chris. I had them on, and we were saying the most expensive crop that's ever going to be planted was planted in 2023. And what that means is the seed, all the chemistry, all the inputs, the price of land, the cash rent, the machinery, even the return on labor, most expensive crop we ever planted. And I just listened to that in preparation for this. I just listened to that episode, and I was saying, all right, big deal. If the numbers work, the numbers work. In other words, if your planting cost is $5 a bushel projected on corn, but you're selling it for $5.60, I'd take 60 cents of margin on every bushel and put it on 220 bushels. Did it end up being as big of a deal that it was the most expensive crop we ever planted in 2023?
For the majority of producers, the answer is yes.
It ended up being a big deal. It ended up being a problem?
For some producers, yes, and I can get into some explanation on that. You know, the one big caveat or the big challenge, I think, for 2023 is still an issue for many producers. And that issue is unpriced production. So if you're a producer in Damian's neck of the world, where it's God's country and the yields were phenomenal this year, from that area, from Indiana on east and parts of Michigan and stuff, the yields were phenomenal. And there were areas of Illinois, areas of Missouri, pockets. I mean, we're in 18 different states, and we have some producers in almost every state that had record yields, but we also had producers.
By the way, to the listener, meaning his client base is in 18 different states. So Chris has a very good, shall we say, point of reference, because they work and dig into the numbers with client base in 18 different states. Any Canadians or just all U.S.?
Yep, Canada too. Yep.
Yeah. So you got a couple of provinces and 18 states to pull your data from. So that's good. Yeah, we had amazing yields in Northeast Indiana. Like my guy is a dairy guy, which they always knock has always been dairy people are not great crop people, but he basically pulled off triticale at Memorial Day, and then had his custom operator go out and plant in strip plant in corn like June 1st. We got maybe a half inch of rain in June. I thought this not going to work. Essentially, it's almost like double cropping, right? Mm-hmm. No rain in June, planted right into a drought a month late, arguably, 221 bushel corn. It was supposed to be silage. He didn't need the silage because the corn nearest to his facility that is the easiest to haul that much tonnage, 20% more tons per acre than they anticipated. The yields were amazing in my part of the world, and it wasn't because of the weather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in that portion of the country, what happened with producers that maybe thought they were 50% sold on their commodities or whatever, maybe they, instead of being 50% sold, maybe they were 35% sold. So now they're,
because of such huge yields, so now they've got a bunch of stuff that's unpriced.
Right.
The bonus is you've got these extra bushels. Negative is you didn't anticipate them, so you don't have them priced.
Right. And in the meantime, we've seen the prices go from, mid to lower sixes to mid to upper fours in terms of cost per bushel. And so we've seen a significant decline in the commodity price for both corn, soybeans, and wheat. And at the same time, some of these areas had really big yields. And then, I'll play the poor farmer card in my neck of the woods. You can look at the drought map from the summer, and in Northeast Iowa, an area where I farm, my family's farm operation, our final yield was 191 bushel an acre. Last year it was 244.
Yeah, so you're off. I'm not laughing. I mean, you're off 30%, 40%. I mean, you're down considerably.
Right. And so, therein lies the importance of risk management and why the crop insurance last year was such an important component. I mean, we're fine because we had $591 for a price coverage on corn, and like $1373 or something like that. It was a big number on soybeans too. And so, we will have an okay financial year, but we were way off the pace. And so I thought I was 60% sold. Instead, I'm, 80% sold,
80% sold, right.
But that turned out to be a good thing because, as producers, we had the opportunity to sell $6 plus corn for a pretty significant amount of time. And I'm not being critical. I'm just saying that opportunity was there, and there's a lot of frustration out there now because there's a lot of producers that sold very little. There are a lot of producers that were maybe 25 or 30% sold. And the reasoning behind that, the logic behind those decisions that I think a lot of producers made to defend them a little bit in their decision making was, we had weather issues, we had heat, we had no rain, very limited rain, forecasts of a lot of heat, forecasts of no rain, while at the same time we had really good insurance coverage levels. And so people felt pretty well protected. And then the third reason for that decision making that has gotten a lot of people in a hole here was the fact that, they were looking at the opportunity thinking that, well, $6 corn, we had $7 corn the year before and $8 corn the year before that, and we were making money. And sometimes when the commodity prices get really high for a while, we get lulled to sleep. And I think there was just enough question in the air. A lot of guys just didn't pull the trigger. And I think that's what's gotten a lot of people in a situation where 2023 is going to be not the most profitable year for a lot of people, even though the yields were there in some areas. And even though where the yields weren't, you had to rely on crop insurance. And so 2023 was the most expensive crop we ever put in. And hindsight's always 2020. Yeah, we should have sold. Everybody should have sold out at $6. Right. But there's so many other variables to play in that equation.
Well, your example of being from a 244 bushel, using corn as an example, on your own farm in Iowa, 244 bushel 2022 to 191, I think you said.
Yep.
You're talking about when saying, well, you should have sold. Well, if you had sold 240 bushel corn, you'd be buying 50 bushels of corn per acre that you farmed.
Right. The only thing is I would have had it sold at a higher price. That'd have been easy to get out of that situation. But on the same token, you can only sell to your insurance level. And I think that might be one of the lessons of 2023.
I like it. Let's talk about that because I want to get into the insurance. This is perfect. What? It's like you knew how to host this yourself. You didn't even need me here.
Well, I think though that the insurance, we bought crop insurance so that it would give us the ability to make sales preemptively.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us got caught up in the fact that, the weather was where it was, the market procrastinators or whatever you call, the people that are telling us where the markets might go, that they don't really know.
Prognosticators.
That's the word I was trying to get out. So, they're supposed to know, or they think they know. Nobody knows. And so really what Shay and I try to do with Profit Manager, which is our software tool for cost of production analysis, we try to make sure that people know their cost of production and that they determine a margin target instead of a price target. Because if you set your sights on a price target, you're throwing darts at the wall because nobody knows where that's going to go. If you have a margin target and the price objective, that reaches, your profit margin, let's say it's 10%, then you pull the trigger there from a disciplined perspective. Could you have gotten 18%? Maybe, but who cares? You're going to stay in business and you're going to be in business if you do the same type of objective marketing every single year.
All right. So let's talk about then. It's really a tale of two different geographies. There's areas like mine where, even visibly, like guys that I know said, we didn't see this coming. And, it's neat to say, well, how are you surprised when the combine rolls? You could have gone out there in August and checked it. It still isn't the same as when the combine rolls, when you really know what you have. So those folks are doing fine. The financial picture should look really shiny in certain geographies and a little lesser where you are. But then the insurance part of it. So I planted the expensive corn. I planted expensive beans. I planted expensive wheat. The inputs were expensive, but I'm insured. Is there a problem?
There is in a realm of that. And so, I'll guarantee you there's somebody listening to this that yielded right at their APH, which is your actual production history. That would be the number that, let's say that their actual production history, we'll use corn as an example. Let's say that they yielded 200 bushel an acre on corn, and that's their actual production history. Well, with where the fall price came in, there was an indemnity payment that would have been paid out on that. So assuming they bought 85% coverage, you could have bought, various levels of coverage. The next level down would have been 80%. There's a number of people out there that probably bought 80% coverage and probably yielded right at about their APH and probably received no indemnity payments. And if they didn't have a lot of grain priced, the cost of production last year for our average client in 2023 at the beginning of the year was pushing 530.
Yep.
At the end of the year, we ended up closer to, and it looks like, and I don't have all the final yields in, so this is a perspective, but we're looking at right at about $5.
Okay, so
it did come down because the yields came up in enough other areas that it brought that cost of production down by maybe 25 to 30 cents, it looks like.
Yeah, so cost of production went down from projection, and it wasn't because inputs didn't really do it. It's because yield.
Right.
The cost of production goes down as yield goes up.
Right.
And so that's comforting news on an aggregate all across your 18 states and 2 provinces situation. The person that's absolutely got stung, whether whatever, says, that's nice, Chris, that on average, all of your clients are at $5 cost of production. Because my yield was so shitty, I'm around $6. So mine was like 623. Yeah.
Because my yield came down to 191.
So much, right.
So our cost went way up, but our indemnity payment was like 80 cents a bushel.
Okay, so that's the other thing. So the person that's, there's a lot of people that work in ag, me being one of them, that don't really understand all of the ins and outs of the insurance game. And it's not a game, but the point is it's one of the few industries, maybe the only industry, and my farm friends get mad at me for saying this, but it's true. The dry cleaner down here cannot get the USDA to pay for an insurance policy that will guarantee them revenue to keep them solvent. In agriculture, we can. So
that's what keeps land values high.
It keeps land values high, and it keeps you operating, and it keeps you operating. It keeps the food supply stable. That's the argument, of course, for crop insurance. Crop insurance groups have been clients of mine a number of times. Yep. But the reality I always tell to my farm friends when they were like, "Oh, well, I'm got all this risk," I'm like, well, I don't know. I have a friend that owns 6 retail units, and there's no insurance to guarantee them revenue. So you can guarantee through the federal insurance program up to 85% of APH, right? Mm-hmm. You buy a policy for 85%. And in that case, were you at 85% on your numbers?
Yep, 85%. And then there's some nuances there that we carried as well, which probably is more detailed than we'd want to get into. But
you got essentially, with your elevated cost of production, having poor yields and high input prices, Chris, did insurance make you're back to, you're solvent? I mean, you're break even, or are you a little above? Did it get you above break even?
Yeah. So like I'll just tell you, my numbers, our average selling price at the end of the harvest, where we knew what our yields were. So then we knew exactly, our average selling price was 623. The problem is I have to sell the rest of the bushels. We ended up about 80%. So if we sell those other 20% bushels at current prices, as we record this now in that 480 range, that gets us back down to about 588 per bushel.
And your cost of production was 6. Your cost of production was 6.25. So
right, but then you add 80 cents to that number for the indemnity payment, we're whole again. Yeah. So that's why that insurance is so important. But it's also to make the point why preemptive sales are so important every year. When you buy that insurance policy, and if you know where your margin is, and you have a margin objective instead of a price objective, that does help. I mean, it's not perfect. I mean, there was a couple of years there where, when you use our method, the 2 years prior to that, you were smarter to do nothing and just show up, wake up. If you could wake up, you could make money the last couple of years in 2021 and 22, 23 and beyond is going to be a little different.
Well, that's the case that, even a blind squirrel kind of a thing finds a nut. The last couple of years, you didn't need to do any of these things. This is getting to where the farmer has to put on the accountant hat and work with people like you and crop insurance, et cetera, because otherwise you'd have lost your shirt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, the other component too that's going to be real important is the lender relationship for the next couple of years as we think about, looking forward now, is as we review the 23, what happened and why did it happen and what can we learn from 23? And then how do we apply that into 2024 as we have those discussions with our family members and our partners and our lenders and everybody as we move forward.
And I want to do, speaking of moving forward, then I want to do the wrap on 2023 numbers, and then I want to do the look ahead, because everybody is going to, I've heard a number of predictions about where we're going to be in 2024. I'll do that. Before I do, dear listener, I want to ask you about where you are in your regenerative journey. Are you making money on environmental programs? Because you probably could be. If you do reduce tillage, if you do cover crops, and increasingly you're seeing a need for doing this, protecting that $20,000 an acre ground from erosion, putting in roots that then all of a sudden keep your soil working and biologically active for several months when otherwise they wouldn't be. Truterra can help you in this journey. You can make money off of those acres. That's a side revenue. It's a nice little side hustle for probably not doing much different than you're already doing. Maybe this could work for you. Go to TruterraAg.com, Truterra, Truterra. Remember, they're an offshoot of Land O'Lakes. You know you can trust them, and they can help you make money on your regenerative journey. Good for the environment, good for the ground, and good for your pocketbook. Check out Truterra. All right. Everybody came into 2023 still pretty flush when we talk about farm finances. This isn't the 1980s. 2019, we got the, what was it called? The MFP money, tariff relief money. 2020 was the $51 billion federal parachute that came in because of the COVID thing. Agriculture got government monies in 2018, 19, 20. 21, 22, prices are very, very good. Yields are very, very good. Farm Belt made a whole bunch of money. 2023, where are we going to end up on the net farm income? And then take me ahead.
So I think as a whole, what we see as of right now, anyway, we're seeing returns in that 15% ROI range on average. But the range is pretty extreme. So we're still seeing some farm operations that, are pushing the 30% return on investment. And we're seeing some operations that are going to be in the red. The ones that are going to be in the red, I don't know how far yet, though, because there's this dilemma of these unpriced bushels yet. And so, I think we almost have to reconvene in a couple of months, or maybe even, June or July, after we find out what price level are they able to accomplish. Because I think what the lenders are going to do is they're going to take a market value balance sheet approach, and they're going to look at the unsold bushels at whatever that current price is with maybe some discount. So let's say corn is $4.80, they might put corn on the balance sheet at $4.50 and look at it from a conservative perspective to see where their working capital position is. And for a lot of the producers, working capital position is strong. So I think they're going to, pretty much everybody, I think, that is going to survive. There can be exceptions to this. They're going to survive 23, even if you had a bad year. The dilemma is, what is your working capital position? Do you have enough cash? And cash flow will be king. And so, as we finish up 23, then I guess my answer to you is the profitability side is a big range, 30% to, probably 15%. On the below 15%, those are the producers that have a fair amount of unsold bushels and maybe also have some additional off-farm revenue. They do some other things. They've got some diversification, and so there's income there that's offsetting a little bit. And then there's the operators like myself and our family operation that insurance bailed us out. Mm-hmm. So I think it's gonna be a yet to be seen as far as those that may not have such a good year, how bad or can they scrounge up enough price yet to maybe break even, hopefully.
We kind of do this thing in agriculture where we predict that there's going to be a downturn. And I guess it's like we have this thing where we always predict there's going to be a downturn. And we've been kind of hearing this for a while. Is 2024 the year?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. What I would say is when producers put together the cash flow for 2024, they look at the balance sheet, the market value balance sheet, look at earned equity or the lack of it from 23. Again, where's that working capital position? And I think independent of everything else around us, we got to do our own thing. We got to sit down and, and that's what we do when we meet with producers is we sit down and we put together a plan and say, okay, what do we need to do in this specific situation to make sure we hold things together if our cost of production is $4.80, and by the way, the cost of production for corn projected right now is basically $4.80. as of right now. That number is going to ebb and
So
flow.
that's cost. That's cost is your projection on cost of production for 2024 is 480.
480, and that's on our producers, assuming they're going to get on average 213 bushel corn.
Do you have a projection on? Do you have a projection on cost cost of planting and production for the other commodities?
Yeah. And so soybeans, we are at 1250 right now, and I don't have enough numbers on wheat that I'm uncomfortable giving you a number there because I don't feel like we have enough good data there. But we do for corn and soybeans, and I think you got to do this same practice regardless of, and these are just averages. So I think the point here is you need to know your numbers. It doesn't really matter what my average numbers are, other than its perspective, right? It's like, okay, what are a bunch of other people getting? But aside from that, what are your numbers? What were your numbers last year, and how much has your cost of production come down from the most expensive crop you ever put in last year in 2023? And what we're seeing is a pretty large drop. I mean, we're seeing about a 50 to 60 cent per bushel drop on corn. A high percentage of that's coming from the decrease is a high percentage of that's coming from fertilizer, nitrogen, equipment, less equipment purchases. We see the equipment purchases slowing way down.
But equipment prices didn't go down. You think
Absolutely.
that the way the shave happens because acquisition of equipment decreases
Slows down,
because
right.
of equipment price decreases.
Yep. The dilemmas, if you want to pick on some individual line items for all of us to be concerned about, return to management is what we classify or lenders tend to call it cost of living.
Yes.
Well, in that return to management category or cost of living, whatever you want to call it, that's about $100 an acre for our average client right now. That still looks like it's going to be up about maybe 1 to 2%, but the inflationary impact, inflation's not, I don't think it's going to go down for all of us, but I think it's steady, at least from what we're seeing so far, as things have kind of leveled off, but the prices are not going down. So consequently, that's a big deal. The other big one is interest rates. I just was looking at the numbers here. We're up 71% on interest rate cost.
By the way, now this is something that you and I have talked about before, I believe. The average person says interest rates went up 2%. What? Or it went up 4%, went up from 4 to 8%. My operating loan was
That's
at 4%. They think that I'm like, no. The rate is from 4 to 8, but the actual percentage that it went up is 100%. If something goes from 4% to 8%. And it's hard because a lot of these ag people don't look at money as an input. I always say, imagine fertilizer went from $4 to $8. That's a doubling. That's what interest rates did. And that's, Creed, your buddy Jared Creed, my buddy Jared Creed, he was talking about some of the farm operations he works with, and he said they're carrying $70 a year per acre farmed of interest. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, it does. I mean,
okay, compare that to price of seed per acre, and it's about the same thing.
Yeah, it depends on which crop you're growing. Corn's closer to 100 and looks like we're going to be right in that $117, $118 average on seed corn. Soybeans would be closer to $75 an acre. But those are those are averages that we see with Profit Manager. But back to your interest comment, the one thing that I'd like to say about that 71% from our perspective and what we're seeing is we have producers that their interest cost hasn't gone up because they're operating on cash, but in some cases it's like, well, what do we do with this cash? And it's like, hang on to it. There's CD, there's places you can put it now and get 5% return. So you let that money make you money. If you have excess, because we do have a bunch of clients that are flush with cash. We also, though, have a bunch of clients that have not really improved their line of credit needs for various reasons. Some of them are they bought land, they bought equipment, they bought other stuff. their principal and interest needs or requirements are higher. And so their line of credit needs are just as high or maybe higher than they were because they've grown their business. But now their interest cost is 120% more than it was when they made those decisions to grow the business. So when I say it's 71%, that's the average of the range. So the range we're seeing is about 120% to essentially zero, or positive 5% because they can take that cash and put it into a money market or something to generate some income.
Yeah. So when we talk about projections then for the next year, there's in a rising interest rate, which we're probably going to stay, not rise, but stay. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like to me, and we don't have crystal ball. Maybe these interest rates stay about where they are, which is still considerably higher than it was just a year and a half ago. And then we know that we're going to be in break even. There's a lot of folks that are younger that don't realize that we've been in situations historically where we might go a decade and the farm sector is underwater. And the thing that props them up or keeps them, profitable is government payments. Is 2024 going to be one of those? Is this where it starts?
I think it's going to be tough for the government to do much in 2024. I sure wouldn't count on it. I think we got to figure out.
Have you not noticed the trillions of dollars that are being flung around out there?
I have, and I don't know how long we can do that. That's the scary part. I wouldn't count on it. That's for sure. I mean, we got to be able to figure out how to do this stuff on our own individually. And if pennies from heaven show up, I guess they do, but you can't count on it. And the support levels are so low that they're insignificant with respect to where the inflation has taken all of the other stuff. And so, I think we're going to have to put our seatbelts on. I just was talking to a lender yesterday about this. I mean, we're going to put our seatbelts on and our big boy pants and be like the industries you just was talking about that don't have insurance. I mean, we're going to have insurance and we're going to be able to put some floors, I think, in to keep us so we stay in business.
Yep.
But, I had a conversation with a client the other day that, we were looking at his trends, and over the last 10 years, he's had some years where he's made 30% return. He's had some years where he had lost, I think, like 19% loss. Mm-hmm. But if we look at him overall, he's at about a 10.5% return on investment over time. And so I think a person has to step back, and in some years, you almost have to limit your losses. I mean, that sounds bad, and I hate to say it that way, but sometimes we have to manage our situation to the best of our ability. And if we get too out of our mind as far as we got to have $6 corn, we'll never have anything sold,
Yeah.
So I think we got to limit it. Some years you have to limit your losses too.
It's almost also limiting expectation. Like we're just talking about there. It's like realizing the expectation is we're going to stay solvent, but we're not going to bang a base hit. A base hit would be amazing, sometimes.
Yeah. What we always tell our clients is let's calibrate our expectations for reality, right? And so, when we get that cost production set, and we, because like right now, I mean, the average producer right now probably knows 75% of their cost production. Mm-hmm. And what we see right now for, I just told you is our average is 479. Well, you can, that's about what you can lock in right now. So you can basically lock in break even. And no recommendations here, but I'm just saying that if we get some price strength, there's probably going to be some opportunities. No one knows for sure, but there's likely to be some opportunities there to plug in some profit margins that, and the opportunities were there earlier. We've got, I think our clients right now are 9% sold on corn and 6% sold on soybeans at an average selling price of $531 on corn and $13.05 on soybeans, which is generating them a 6.5% return on corn and a 3% return on soybeans. So that's what
this is 24.
Yep. So that's where I think we got to kind of watch this real close. And instead of, if you made 30% last year, if you recalibrate your prospectus and say, okay, my margin target this year might be 7% or 8%, or if you made 3% last year, maybe you just try to make 3% again,
Yeah, Chris, I want to throw this out there because inflation, it's good for our land values. It's these commodity prices, okay, you're talking $5 corn or whatever for it. We're not probably going to go back to $1.60 corn that we had just in the year 2001. We're probably not going back there. But our cost of inputs, did they come down? I mean, is this just where we are? And I asked that question to Vaklovic and Shea 13 months ago when we recorded talking about the farm financial picture. They talk about labor being sticky. I'm at the gas station 2 days ago filling up, and on the screen on the gas pump, it says, now hiring, this is to work inside of a gas station and sell people cans of pop, $17 an hour. The labor situation doesn't retreat in terms of the costs. I don't know that these goods do. You talked about machinery. I don't know how you take a $600,000 sprayer and then all of a sudden tell them you're going to sell it for $450. What gives? Anything?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. There's a few pieces to that question. The labor, yes, that is sticky. Equipment, yes, that is sticky. And the other one is land. Right now on land, we're basically almost exactly even. That one's going to be interesting because there's still some land rent negotiations that they have the negotiation typically in that January, February timeframe to determine the actual rate. Maybe they stay the same. But as of right now, our data is showing essentially land rents and land values are about steady. Yeah. So that number is probably sticky. Well, the equipment and the land, those are more of a fixed expense.
Correct.
And then you have all these variable expenses. And
so let's talk about variables. Seed. The seed companies were slow to bump up along with everything else, but then they did bump up, and enough that my number was off. They're actually, but I don't buy a lot of seed. Seed, chemical, FERT. I don't.
Yeah. So those variable costs, what we look at is we look at cost line trends over time on a per unit basis. Okay. So I think a lot of times as farmers, the farmers think in terms of per acre. And I think the industry needs to do a better job of thinking in terms of per unit of production. Even, if I was selling seed and I'm not, or if I was selling chemicals, I would be selling based on per unit, not cost per bag or per bushel or per unit of sale. It'd be per unit of production.
Yeah.
And if you look at seed costs on a basis of per unit production, this year, let me give you an example on seed. I'm going to sound like a seed sales rep here now for a second, but this is important to understand as a producer and as a business person in general. I don't care if you're selling widgets or what you're selling, is from a seed perspective. In our farm operation, we yielded 191 bushel an acre this year. In 2012, we had the exact same amount of rainfall. That year, we yielded 149 bushel an acre. With the exact same amount of rainfall, we've picked up about a 4 bushel yield improvement, with a high percentage of that being the technology produced by the seed industry that has brought us that extra, what am I saying, an extra 40 bushel.
40 bushel is $5, and for simple numbers, $200. So $200 on so you're saying you didn't spend $200 more for that acres. What's a bag of seed corn is?
No, the value of seed now, even if it's a $400 a bag, what is it divided by the units of production?
Yep.
And I'm not advocating for higher prices or that it's justified or whatever. You can argue it however you want. I'm just saying that as an industry and in any business, I think we need to do a better job of looking at costs of per unit of production of any input you purchase, because I think we get carried away and sometimes don't always look at the right metric. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where, when we're sitting down with clients, we're trying to help them look at, okay, where do you cut and where do you spend? And one area you do not ever want to cut on is anything that can impact production, because the fastest way to lower your cost of production is increase productivity. And so, so what gives is the things like fertilizer, nitrogen, those things that are commodity based that don't have added value. So seed, equipment, labor, all of those things have added value. So I would be real careful, pick on labor for a second. You can hire a dumbass, and excuse my French, but you can hire somebody that's going to be half-ass, or you can hire somebody that's going to be a high quality labor person that can really do a good job, and you're going to pay for it. And a lot of times we'll sit down with producers that are doing succession planning, and they'll be like, we can't afford $100,000. I'm only taking $80,000 out. I can't pay $100,000 for that person. Well, you can't afford not to, probably, because you have the need for that. And that person you're going to pay $100,000 a year for is probably going to make you $200,000. So the way I'm answering your question is be careful what gives, right? Manage the things, that are going to generate more productivity, and then look at those areas where maybe you can be more efficient. It's like spreading that equipment over more acres, looking at what things can lower that, what's the contribution margin of growth and those kind of things.
All right. And then a different perspective. You're a business person as well as a producer, as well as a consultant to producers. Let's put on your agribusiness side. What do I need to think about if I'm out here in agribusiness? If I'm not the producer, I think that the ability to pass on price increases is limited. And there's all reality. If you're a company, your employees aren't asking for less income. You know what I mean? So I think there's going to be a little squeeze for the companies that feed the farms, which is all of us, right? I hear in this industry, because their ability to pass on price increases is limited other than what we've already done. And I don't think this inflation situation, as much as the media and the current administration keeps telling us it's under control, the consumer knows better. The consumer knows when to call bullshit. Go to the grocery and tell me that, that we're under control. So what about the companies that feed the farm belt? Are we going to get squeezed?
So I guess what I would say from that is, there's going to be price resistance from us as producers to the industry. There's no doubt. And so I think it really does come down to service and individualistic. What are you providing besides just that service or that tool? Equipment manufacturers, you can look at equipment dealers and those kind of things. Those ones that are the best service providers and all that, they're the ones that are gonna make hay. And so it's a lot of it's going to be relationship based. But as far as us as producers expecting equipment to come down in price or any of those things, the only way we're going to be able to improve that is increase efficiency, extend the life of some of the existing equipment. I think it's going to get interesting for the equipment manufacturers in the next couple of years, because that's the area, it's the second largest line item expense. And it's going to be the one that's going to be, I think, throttled back first from most producers, because in the last 3 years, producers have spent, in my opinion, and in our observation from AgView, the most amount of money in a 3-year window we've seen invested back in the equipment fleet. Yep. And so because the equipment fleet's in pretty good shape now, I think that's an industry that's gonna be challenged to a large extent. You have to have seed every year. You have to have crop protection every year. You have to have crop insurance every year. There's all these other things.
But you don't need the new shiny steel every year. And like you said, when things are up, when the tide is up, as it has been for the last, you could say 5 years, these guys have probably, and gals have probably equipped up pretty well. So you would not be a buyer of, you will not be a buyer of as much machinery when things get a little skinny, is what I'm hearing there at the Barron operation. I
can see that just in our conversations with clients, that's going to be the area that's going to be the most threatened in the industry. Yep. With respect to what people are doing. However, I would say, though, people are not going to step back on the technology side of things. So if they're, like the See and Spray or the Exact Apply, those kind of technology improvements that instantaneously generate efficiency, producers will continue to invest in those areas. So I think that industry needs to look at what can we provide the producer that's their efficiency. It's like you talked about in your Do Business Better book, try to figure out what it is that your client needs and provide that. And what the producers are going to need is going to be the technology and improvement of efficiency.
Yeah. I love it when you always plug my books for me. I appreciate that. It's been four and a half years since Do Business Better came out. I think, and also it does make that AGCO Trimble joint venture seem very smart because they're saying that it's technology to retrofit. You got a 10-year-old tractor, you don't have to buy a new machine. We can put this technology in there. And let's face it, if you're going over your ground less, your machines might have more shelf life anyhow. And if it's just the technology and it's just like plugging in new software, and I think that's where the future is going anyway. And I think you just said. All right. His name's Chris Barron. Is there anything you want to get me out of here? Is there anything I missed on projection? So look ahead in 2024. You're saying don't be like the key bank guy that never had any balls to stand up with his opinion. What are we going to do in 2024? Are we going to make money? I think we're still going to be. You were a little bit dour last year at this time. You told me, it's going to be really tight in 2023, and we're okay in 2023. I think we're going to be about the same in 2024, my prediction. Yours?
Yeah, 2024 is going to be up to us as individuals. There's going to be farms that are going to make a lot of money in 24 because of the decisions that will be made, knowing their costs, managing the efficiency of the business. And I think the opportunity is going to be there. I'm optimistic about 24. 80% of the time when we do budgets in, let's say, December and January, it's real easy to put red ink at the bottom of the budget. And for some reason, about 80% of the time, maybe 90% of the time, those budgets turn green throughout the course of the year, provided you take advantage of the opportunities when that occurs. So, watch the markets, don't skimp on insurance, don't skip on inputs, put in, plan on a large crop because the quickest way to lower your cost of production is to increase productivity. So I'm optimistic. I think we can do it again. We seem to do it almost every year.
And I appreciate you saying that because last year at this time, you were a little dour. And then anyway, his name is Chris Barron. He's got a company called AgView Solutions. He's also an Iowa farmer. He does a really cool thing. It's called what? The Executive. It's happening next month, January. You're doing it right here in my backyard.
Yep, the AgView Executive Business Conference, in Phoenix this year. Next year it's going to be, year it's full, unfortunately, but next year it's going to be in Florida and Fort Lauderdale. So it's a great conference. You'll be there next year too.
Yeah, he says he's going to put me on stage. I did it 2 years ago for them. Well, when you call it the executive, it means if you're a farmer and you are the executive of your farming operation, this is the conference for you because it's all about outlook, numbers, and that sort of thing. All right. If you want to find out more, go and check out his stuff, AgView Solutions. What's the website?
AgViewSolutions.com.
Got it. Till next time, I'm Damian Mason. This is the Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. Everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.